Hey guys, and welcome to Politics Snaps. Now you're about to watch an interview I did with Tom Harwood, so that's the prominent young Conservative and young Brexiteer. He ran the Student Leave campaign in 2016. He now works with Guido Fawkes, the centre-right / pro-Brexit political website. So I think he's got a lot of interesting stuff to say, especially about Brexit and about Corbyn. So the two massive issues. Also, this channel is starting to become a lot more active, so if you want to subscribe, that would be great. I would not be angry if you want to subscribe, I could accept that. So yeah, thanks a lot, and I hope you enjoy. So yes, I'm joined by Tom Harwood, who is a prominent Brexit activist. You're one of the key student Brexit organisers in 2016. So thanks a lot for your time, Tom. Now, the first obvious question is, how do you think Brexit's going?
Well, I just wish that Brexit were being delivered by people who believed in it. You'd think it would be natural that in a situation where the most people who voted for anything in the history of this country, in the history of democratic processes of this country, 17.4 million people, a gargantuan figure, you get this extraordinary mandate to deliver this seismic, once-in-a-generation change for the country. And you end up having someone leading us through the process who can't even say that if there were a referendum tomorrow, she'd vote the way that the majority of people in this country would. So I think we're in this extraordinary situation whereby the government sees Brexit not as an opportunity, but as a damage mitigation exercise. And to that extent, you have these incredibly bland, risk-averse politicians trying to deliver a result that they don't really understand or believe in, and we've ended up with this cat-handed deal. I think it's a very sad situation.
I mean, do you think that Brexit can be delivered by someone who backed Remain in 2016?
No. Like, fundamentally. I mean, Theresa May didn't even believe that. Actually, in her 2016 election pitch to become leader of the Conservative Party, one of her key promises to the party was that she would put someone in charge of Brexit negotiations who believed in it and voted for it. And she broke that pledge almost immediately because, yes, we've always nominally had a Brexit secretary in charge of DexU who voted leave, but in reality the person pulling the strings has been either the Prime Minister or the Civil Service in the form of Ollie Robbins. And really, you have this extraordinary situation where David Davis wasn't even shown the Chequers Agreement until basically the same time as the rest of the Cabinet were. And Dominic Raab wasn't even shown certain key parts of the withdrawal agreement text until basically the same time as the rest of the cabinet was. It seems to be that the Brexit secretary isn't so much a lead negotiator as a literal secretary in the very strict definition of the word. I mean, it's a nonsense pretend position, and Theresa May's fundamentally betrayed that promise that got her the position that she holds in the first place.
I mean, do you think the Brexiteers in the cabinet, obviously before they resigned, were outmanoeuvred essentially by May and perhaps Hammond? And at what point, what do you think was a crucial point? Was it the Northern Ireland point where we agreed that the joint agreement there wouldn't be any sort of hard border? Was that the key?
I would say a little bit before then, actually. I'd say the general election. As soon as you have the general election and you have number 10 basically lose its key Brexiteer, who was Nick Timothy. Now, I don't agree with Nick Timothy on most domestic policy, but the one thing that you can say about him was that he was a true believer in the cause of taking back control. And as soon as he was out of number 10, Theresa May seems to have been convinced by the civil service, particularly people around her, that the only way that you can make Brexit the least damaging exercise possible is by staying within a form of customs union. And also she was so weakened politically, domestically, following that election, that she scrambled towards that December accord and reaching that signing up to this backstop, and all of those things that happened in those very hurried days and sort of 3 a.m. flights around that time in December that year. That's really when everything, when things stopped being able to go right, yeah. And that's when David Davis should have resigned, really. But the seeds of that lay in the 2017 election.
I mean, do you think it's now too late to get the kind of Brexit deal something like you would like?
I would never say never. I think that really fundamentally one of the reasons that it has sort of stretched on for so long is that the EU feel they can string us out. They don't believe that Number 10 believes that no deal could be an okay situation for the country, and therefore we do not have that much leverage when we are in a situation far from the Prime Minister's original slogan of no deal being better than a bad deal. Now the Prime Minister's slogan seems to be any deal is better than no deal, and this is fundamentally damaging to our negotiation position. And so, I mean, really, we've still got 5 or so months left. If we had someone in charge who the EU plausibly believed could carry through that no-deal situation, who the EU plausibly believed, whether they agree with them or not, that's irrelevant, but who the EU plausibly believed would be very happy to sail through to no deal, ironically then we'd probably end up with a deal, and with a better one at that.
Well, it seems to me that May primarily saw the Brexit vote as about immigration. I mean, certainly the deal she's arranged is basically designed to stop free movement above all else. As a Brexiteer, is that how you'd interpret the vote, or do you think that people like you have been kind of misinterpreted by the Prime Minister?
It's an incredibly SW1 interpretation of Brexit. You have all of these sort of political and media elite who, following the referendum, sort of thought, okay, Brexit, that's all about immigration. That's the only thing that people who voted to leave the EU care about. Whereas actually, sort of, if you look at all of the evidence, or you actually take your time to speak to people who voted leave, that's sure a part of what people voted for, but it's not the whole of what people voted for. It's not even the top priority, according to the Ashcroft polls immediately after the referendum. What the Ashcroft poll says, above all else, Brexiteers cared about taking back control over domestic lawmaking. That's fundamentally the crux of the issue. You know, who governs? Who determines your laws? Who is the ultimate arbiter of what is the law in your country? And that means that, crucially, people who voted leave really care about the highest court in the land not being the ECJ. They really care about being able to set our own domestic regulatory regime. And also, and I think this is something that politicians often miss, but the terms of trade. People actually genuinely care about being able to set our own tariff schedules. And the thing is, not everyone is well versed in sort of the GATT world trading system. But that doesn't mean that they don't think that the UK should be able to set our own trade deals. And yes, when you ask a technical question in a poll, you might get a confused answer. But when you ask specific questions as to who do you think is best placed to negotiate on behalf of the UK, the EU, these 28 disparate interests, or the UK government, people naturally say the UK government. And really, we'd have, I think one of the strongest arguments of the Leave campaign was the fact that the UK should be able to determine its own free trade agreements, not be held back by a traditionally more protectionist EU bloc, and actually be able to be that gallivanting, buccaneering nation around the world. What built up our strength initially, our friends and partners aren't only within one continent of the world. Actually, we probably have deeper both economic and emotional links with countries that speak our language and are based on common law. These are the parts of the world that we should really be hugging tight. And unfortunately, what May's current withdrawal agreement could set us up for is an inability to pursue those grand opportunities. And I just think that's deeply, deeply sad.
Does it worry you that Brexit could be the catalyst for a Corbyn government, i.e. by splitting the right and to some extent splitting the Conservative Party from a section of business opinion? Do you think that the Brexit vote could kind of empower Corbyn through the middle?
Now, this is a really interesting question, because Jeremy Corbyn is someone who has believed in Brexit for 40 years. Jeremy Corbyn is someone who voted to leave the then common market in 1975 and has voted against every single EU treaty subsequently. There's even significant question among his own party which way he voted in the 2016 referendum. And to that extent, I don't think that the Brexit vote really cuts across party lines. I mean, you saw this incredibly high, when you look at the correlation, for example, between the average income in a council ward and the way that council ward voted in the referendum is broadly correlated with the more hard up a council ward was, the less wealthy people were, the more likely they were to vote against this failed European project. And traditionally, those are actually Labour voting areas of the country. So really, in 2017, what we saw, far from a splitting of the right, actually 40% of what's technically called the C2DE demographic, the sort of working class of this country, as many working class people in 2017 voted Conservative as did Labour. And that's really extraordinary. We're seeing a sort of realignment, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, in terms of people who believe in a sense of nationhood and are a little bit sceptical of a sort of a liberal elite that seems to have dominated, well, the whole of politics for several years. Really, what we're seeing, not just in the UK but across the world, is a greater scepticism towards people who profess that they have the answer, that they're the economic and political elites, that there can be a grand central plan for society, that their way is the best way. Actually, people not only want to take back control from international organisations, they want to take back control over their own lives. And that is something that I think is fundamental to the Brexit vote, this idea of not being tied down, of being restricted by another power, this idea of sort of self-realisation, of liberation of the individual. That is the fundamental drive that I think is really instinctive in our national character. And I think that was expressed on the 23rd of June 2016.
So obviously if Corbyn does come to power, we'll have a Chancellor's chair who's praised the bombs and bullets of the IRA. I mean, both Corbyn and McDonnell have praised or associated with or defended various terrorist groups and authoritarian regimes. Do you think at a very fundamental level they would be the first government who doesn't necessarily believe completely in parliamentary democracy? Or the first government in Britain's modern history?
Well, John McDonnell is on record as saying that sort of sometimes Parliament is necessary to bypass Parliament and to take to the streets. I mean, the Trotskyist tradition has always been an anti-parliamentary one, far from the parliamentary sovereignty that the country voted for. Really, they'd be opening the door to a subversive tradition of sort of screeching rather than democracy. The people that shout the loudest and smash up the most shops get the most say. And I think that this is really genuinely worrying. It's a fundamentally concerning turn in your politics when you have the Shadow Chancellor saying that he couldn't even be friends with a Tory. That's 40% of the country that he is shutting out from his social circle. And then what happens when you start seeing a group of people based on how they vote politically as the other? Then you end up in very dangerous territory. When authoritarian regimes all around the world over the last 100 years have set up a hate group as the other, you enter into an incredibly dangerous political territory. And I think that this drift of the Labour Party and the inability of moderates in the Labour Party to stop this drift at every level, at internal party democracy level, at review of internal disciplinary committee level, you have seen this steady but sure takeover, really a hostile takeover, a hijacking of the Labour Party by people with incredibly nefarious political opinions, and people who do not believe that anyone who disagrees with them can even be a moral person. And when you see your enemy as someone who is fundamentally evil, you can internally justify many, many dangerous things. And that should seriously worry us as a country.